In the early 1990s, the world was able to see the depths that depravity could travel. A young man living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, demonstrated the extent to which a dark mind could go. Jeffrey Dahmer looked harmless enough, but what stood between him and his demented passions proved fatal. On the morning of November 28, 1994, a young convicted murderer worked diligently to complete the chores at hand, tasks assigned to him by the prison administration. Working in the bathroom, the young man was paired with two convicted murderers, Jesse Anderson, a white man who had murdered his wife and blamed it on a black man, and Christopher Scarver, a black delusional schizophrenic who, although considered himself a Christian, was in prison for first-degree murder. Scarver viewed the young convicted murderer as somewhat of a scourge on society. The majority of the young convicted murderer's victims were black. So, this seemed like an explosive combination to be working in the same place, looking back in hindsight. Approximately 15 minutes after the detail started, prison guards happened by the area and witnessed the young convicted white murderer laying in a pool of blood. Anderson, the other white man on the detail, was found laying in the shower, he too face down in his own blood. The young convicted murderer was taken to the hospital where he died at 9:11 a.m. Anderson would later survive his wounds. Why would an everyday run-of-the-mill convicted murderer draw so much attention? This was not an everyday run-of-the-mill murderer. This was the Milwaukee cannibal, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, a young troubled man recently convicted of 15 known murders he may have committed. Dahmer became known as one of the most deranged and depraved serial killers in crime history. To add to this characterization, Dahmer also attempted to dispose of the victims by dining on some of them and keeping others' body parts within his refrigerator and freezer. What motivated this killer to perform the acts for which he would be made infamous? Certainly not infamy. In all likelihood, Dahmer's crimes would have never been discovered had it not been for one unfortunate incident in 1991. Those who may have never met Dahmer would certainly breathe a sigh of relief that this deranged psychopath was eventually captured. Jeffrey Dahmer was a bit of a weird kid, to say the least. His mother was a slightly imbalanced person, and his dad was a workaholic, so Jeff did not get a great deal of attention. He played games with imaginary friends and scared off his real friends with his strange antics. He also had a strange fetish with dead animals. He loved to see their insides, and it had been claimed on numerous occasions that he once put a dog's severed head on a stick behind his house. Since his father was a doctor, Jeff also got reading material, and sometimes a bit of help when it came to boiling roadkill down to bones for his personal collection. Eventually, Jeff's parents separated. If this wasn't hard enough on Jeff, then the fact that neither parent wanted him must have been. They argued fiercely over his little brother David, but never once bothered to mention Jeffrey's living arrangements. Eventually, he went to live with his mother. Around this time, Jeff discovered drugs and alcohol as a means to forget his problems. Jeff was also known to run through the local mall acting like a lunatic, which probably explains why he had few friends. One night, Jeff was driving back to his mother's when he picked up a hitchhiker, Stephen Hicks, age 19. The two of them went back to Jeffrey's to drink some beer and smoke some pot. It seems that Jeff must have really liked Steve, because when Hicks said it was time for him to go home, Dahmer decided that he did not want his new friend going anywhere. Jeff picked up a weightlifting dumbbell and struck Hicks in the back of the head. He then strangled him. Jeff then dragged the body into the crawl space under the house, where it stayed for a few days. Eventually, the smell became quite strong, so Dahmer went down and cut the remains into pieces, placing them into small plastic bags. He then put the bags in the bushes behind the house, eventually burying them. After a while, Dahmer began to worry about the neighborhood kids digging up the remains, so he dug them up and smashed the bones into pieces, which he scattered around the woods. Over the next 9 years, Dahmer was able to control the urges to kill again. Eventually, Dahmer joined the United States Army, where he ended up stationed in Germany. The last couple of years until Jeff was finally discharged because of his erratic drinking problems. After his military career ended, Jeff accepted his homosexuality and became a regular at Milwaukee's gay bars. He was also arrested for flashing his penis at a 12-year-old boy in a park. He was placed on probation until September 9, 1987 for this incident. Just 6 days after the probation ended, he started killing again. On September 15, 1987, Dahmer spent the day drinking at a gay bar named Club 219 and met up with a gay man named Stephen Toomey. They chatted with each other for a few hours and eventually left together. They went to a hotel and rented a room. Dahmer claims he can't remember what happened once they got to the hotel, only that they drank a lot. He wasn't even sure if they had any form of sexual relations, but when he woke up, Toomey was dead. It seems Jeff beat him very badly and strangled him. After this, Jeff went out and bought a large suitcase, which he then stuffed the body inside and caught a taxi back to his grandmother's house, where he lived in the basement. Once there, he cut the body up, placed the pieces into garbage bags, and put it out by the curb with the rest of the day's trash. On January 16, 1988, Dahmer approached a young male prostitute, James Doxtator, age 14, and offered James money to make a video with him. Doxtator agreed, so Jeff took him home to his basement room. Dahmer then gave James a sleeping drug concoction, and once he passed out, Jeff strangled him. He then stripped the body of all the flesh by using acid, then smashed the bones with a sledgehammer. After he was satisfied with his work, he scattered the bone fragments. On March 24, 1988, Jeff met Richard Guerrero at a bar called the Phoenix. Guerrero was broke, so Jeff offered him some money if he would come back to his place and make a video. Guerrero agreed. Once back at Dahmer's, they had oral sex. Then Jeff offered him a drink, and Richard accepted. Shortly after passing out, Richard was strangled, dismembered, and then disposed of. It was around this time that Jeff's grandmother began to worry about the foul smell coming from the basement. When Jeff's father, Lionel Dahmer, inspected the room, he found a black sticky residue, similar to what acid does to flesh. Upon questioning his son about this, Jeff told his father he had been experimenting with animals. Since Lionel never really cared what Jeff did, he accepted this and didn't bother to worry about it any further. But his grandmother did, and he was asked to move out. Dahmer soon got his own place at 808 North 24th Street. Just 24 hours after moving into his new apartment, Dahmer was in trouble with the police. He had conned a Laotian boy, Kisan Simpsonfoth, 13, into coming up to his apartment. Once there, Dahmer drugged him and molested him, but the boy escaped. He reported the incident to the police, and Dahmer was charged with sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. He spent 1 week in jail before getting released on bail. On January 30th, 1990, Dahmer was found guilty, but sentencing wouldn't take place for another 4 months. On March 25th, 1990, Dahmer met Anthony Sears at La Cage, a gay bar. Dahmer took him back to his grandmother's house because he assumed that the police were watching his apartment. Once there, they had sexual intercourse. Afterwards, Dahmer made him a drink, murdered him, and then decided to keep his skull as a trophy. At Dahmer's sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes sentencing on May 23rd, Dahmer pleaded with the judge for leniency, saying, "I'm an alcoholic and a homosexual with sexual problems." The judge, William Gardner, decided to sentence him to 5 years probation and 1 year in a halfway house so he could continue to work. After serving his time in the halfway house, Dahmer rented a place at the Oxford Apartments, apartment 213. Just 2 weeks after moving into the new infamous apartment building, which has since been demolished, Dahmer met Ray Smith at Club 219. Ray was a newcomer to Milwaukee and seemed to run into the wrong guy at the wrong time. Jeff asked Ray back to his place to pose for some photos. Ray accepted his invitation, and once Jeff offered him a drink. Once Ray passed out, he was strangled. Then Dahmer stripped the body and had necrophilic sex with it. This was the first course that Dahmer admitted to having sexual intercourse with, but definitely not the last. Once he'd had his fun with Ray, he dismembered the body and threw it out with the trash. All except for the skull, he kept that, and painted it to preserve it. This marks the beginning of his macabre collection of human souvenirs. On June 14, 1990, Dahmer met Eddie Smith. Eddie readily accepted Dahmer's advances and went back to Jeff's apartment where they had oral sex. Afterwards, Jeff offered Eddie a drink. Soon after Eddie passed out, Jeff strangled him, dismembered the body, then threw the remains out with the trash. On July 8, 1990, Jeff decided to vary his MO, deciding not to bother drugging his victim. He had a 15-year-old Hispanic kid posing for photos when he picked up a mallet and tried to hit the boy in the head. The kid fought back and eventually escaped. The kid went to the police. But when he begged police not to tell his foster parents that he was gay, the police decided to leave it alone. On September 3, 1990, Dahmer picked up Ernest Miller, took him home, had intercourse with him, drugged him, then changed his game plan with a little plan of his own. He didn't strangle Miller. This time he cut the throat. He then sliced off the biceps and put them in the freezer. And then, upon taking all the flesh from the bone, decided to keep the entire skeleton. It was around this time that Jeff's neighbors started to complain about the putrid smell coming from his apartment. Dahmer explained to the landlord that his fridge was broken and he would get it fixed as soon as possible. In September-October 1990, Jeff met David Thomas. Dahmer and Thomas were drinking in Dahmer's apartment when Jeff gave him a special drink. Jeff didn't want to kill Thomas, but he was worried he might be upset when he awoke that Jeff had drugged him. So Jeff decided the best thing to do was to kill him anyway. This time he filmed the whole dismemberment. He also took photos of David's severed head in various positions in his apartment. These photos were later viewed by Thomas's sister for identification purposes. On February 18, 1991, Dahmer met Curtis Straughter. Curtis wanted to be a model, so when Jeff mentioned he'd pose for photos, he gladly agreed. He was strangled while giving Jeff oral sex. Jeff kept the skull and painted it to preserve it. He also decided to keep the hands as well. On April 7, 1991, Jeff met Errol Lindsay, age 19, at a local bus stop. Errol was paid by Dahmer to come back to his apartment. Dahmer offered him a drink, and he accepted, and soon Dahmer was performing oral sex on his corpse. Jeff kept the skull. On May 24, 1991, Jeff met Tony Hughes at Club 219. Hughes was a deaf mute, so Dahmer wrote his offer on paper and handed it to Tony, $50 to pose for some photos and watch some videos. Dahmer drugged and strangled Hughes, then left the corpse laying in his bedroom for a few days before dismembering it. On May 27, 1991, Dahmer met Konorak Simpsophone, age 14, at a local bus stop. Konorak was the younger brother of the young man who charged Jeff with sexual assault, although Dahmer never knew it at the time. Dahmer got the kid into his apartment, drugged him, then drilled a hole in his head, injecting acid, then left to go get himself some beer. Somehow the kid woke up and was able to make it out of the building into the street, where the police found him wandering around dazed and nude. To them, he was just a drunk homosexual. And when they spoke to Dahmer, their thoughts were confirmed. They went back to the apartment, noticed nothing out of the ordinary, and left Konorak with Dahmer. The police even made a joke about it on the radio. On June 30th, 1991, Dahmer traveled to Chicago for Gay Pride Day. His wallet was stolen at the event. While at a bus depot, he met Matt Turner, another guy that wanted to be a model. Dahmer talked him into coming back to Milwaukee with him. Dahmer paid for the Greyhound bus tickets for them both, and they were soon off on their 90-mile ride. Once safely back in the confines of his apartment, Dahmer drugged and strangled Turner. He then cut off Turner's head, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and placed it in the freezer. He then placed the torso in a blue 57-gallon barrel. On July 4th, 1991, Dahmer decided to pay another visit to Chicago. While there, he met Jeremiah Weinberger, age 23, at a local gay watering hole. Jeremiah even asked his roommate what he thought of Jeff. "He seems all right," the roommate said. So Jeremiah decided to go back to Milwaukee with Jeff. Jeff again paid for Greyhound bus tickets for the 90-mile ride back to his place. Once they arrived back at Jeff's, they had mutual sex and Jeremiah spent the night. But when Jeremiah got sick of having sex with Jeff, he said he was going home. Jeff said fine, then offered him a farewell drink. Jeff then strangled him, and Jeremiah's head was found in the freezer. On July 12, 1991, Jeff met Oliver Lacey, age 23. They went back to Jeff's place, had a drink, fooled around, then Jeff strangled him. He then sliced the right bicep off and ate it. He placed Lacey's head in the fridge next to an open box of Arm & Hammer baking soda, and his heart in the freezer to eat later. He also put other body parts in the freezer. He put the rest of the flesh into the trash, and he kept the entire skeleton. It was at this time that Dahmer was suspended from his job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. It seems that he spent a few too many days at home with his friends. This really upset Dahmer, and then on July 19th, he was fired from his job. On July 19th, 1991, Jeff met Joseph Bredehoff at a local bus stop. It was pouring down rain, and Joseph had a six-pack of beer on him, so he decided to go back to Jeff's to party a bit. Once there, they had oral sex. Then Dahmer drugged and strangled him, slept with the body for the next few days until the head became infested with maggots. Jeff cleaned it and put it in the freezer along with the heads of Turner and Weinberger. He placed the torso in the 57-gallon barrel in the bedroom. Dahmer seemed to have very little control at this point. He seemed to care very little. He was becoming extremely sloppy, and it was only a matter of time before his world would completely collapse. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer met Tracy Edwards, aged 32. Jeff picked him up, got him back to his place. Dahmer claims he remembers little of the evening, and according to Edwards, Jeff pulled out a knife and went from being Mr. Nice to being a cold-hearted SOB. Jeff managed to get a handcuff onto one of Edwards' hands, but Edwards fought back and got away. Police officers Mueller and Routh were doing their nightly patrol down Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee. When they reached the corner of 25th Street, they were flagged down by a black man with a handcuff dangling from his wrist. Hysterically, he explained to the officers that he had been drinking with the man who handcuffed him and tried to kill him. The officers tried to remove the handcuff from Edwards' hands, but their keys would not fit, so Mueller and Routh escorted Edwards back to the man's apartment located at 924 North 25th Street. The door to apartment 213 was opened by Jeffrey Dahmer, a 31-year-old white male. The inside of the apartment was neat and clean, and Dahmer acknowledged that he was responsible for the handcuff and pointed the officers in the direction of the bedroom, which is where he thought the keys would be. He also said, "I just lost my job, and I wanted to drink some beer." After looking around inside, one of the officers opened the fridge and exclaimed, "Oh my God, there's a goddamn head in here. He's one sick son of a bitch." Dahmer suddenly turned on them and fought as the other cop tried to cuff him. After subduing Dahmer, they took him into the police station. Upon searching the apartment, the box of baking soda in the refrigerator hardly absorbed the odors of a decomposing severed head. The freezer had 3 more heads, stored neatly in plastic bags and tied with plastic twisties. There was a door that led to the bedroom closet, and bath, which had been outfitted with a deadbolt lock. Anne E. Schwartz, the reporter who was first on the scene, described what she saw in her book, The Man Who Could Not Kill Enough. In the back of the closet was a metal stockpot that contained decomposed hands. On the shelf above the kettle were 2 skulls. Also in the closet were containers of ethyl alcohol, chloroform, and formaldehyde, along with some glass jars holding male genitalia preserved in formaldehyde. There were Polaroid photos taken by Dahmer at various stages of his victims' deaths. One showed a man's head with the flesh still intact lying in a sink. Another displayed a victim cut open from the neck to the groin, like a deer gutted after the kill. The cut so clean I could see the pelvic bone clearly. Dahmer's bail was originally set at $1 million cash. On August 6th, it was raised to $5 million when 8 more murder charges were added to his regular charges. In the end, Dahmer had 15 murder charges against him. The longest sentence Dahmer muttered at any of the preliminary hearings was, "I understand, Your Honor," when the judge asked if he understood the charges against him. On July 13, 1992, Dahmer ignored his lawyer's advice and changed his plea to guilty, but that he was insane. According to Don Davis, in the Milwaukee murders, the declaration turned the case on its head. Now, instead of having to prove this man did not commit the murders, defense attorney Gerald Boyle would unroll one of the goriest tapestries ever seen in an American courtroom. His task was to convince the jury that Dahmer was crazy, but only an insane person would do the things he did. 2 detectives took turns reading the 160-page confession. It was a catalog of sexual perversion. Detective Dennis Murphy stated that Dahmer felt a tremendous amount of guilt because of his actions. He felt thoroughly evil. Though he quoted from Dahmer's own confession, it's hard for him to believe that a human being could have done what he'd done. He claimed that his fear of being caught was overwhelmed by his excitement of being completely in control. The battle of psychiatrists over whether Dahmer was legally responsible and able to control his actions seemed to confuse the jury. Finally, Boyle drew a chart for the jury which he read them off quickly. Skulls in locker, cannibalism, sexual urges, drilling, making zombies, necrophilia, drinking alcohol all the time, trying to create a shrine, lobotomies, defleshing, calling taxidermists, going to graveyards, masturbating. This is Jeffrey Dahmer, a runaway train on a track of madness. Prosecutor McCain rebutted, he wasn't a runaway train, he was the engineer. He was satisfying his extraordinary sexual cravings. Ladies and gentlemen, he's fooled a lot of people. Please don't let this murderous killer fool you. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and decided that Jeffrey Dahmer did not deserve to spend the rest of his life in a hospital, but in a prison cell. On all 15 counts, Dahmer was found guilty and sane. Dahmer wrote an apology to the judge covering a 13-year bloodbath. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, or a total of 957 years in prison. Dahmer adjusted very well to prison life at the Columbia Correctional Institute in Portage, Wisconsin. Initially, he was not part of the general population of the prison, which would have jeopardized his safety. As it was, he was attacked on July 3, 1994, while attending a chapel service by a Cuban who had never seen before. While in prison, Dahmer was sued twice for $3 billion, even though he had not a red cent to his name. Dahmer, the model prisoner, convinced the prison authorities to allow him more contact with other inmates. He was able to eat in communal areas, and he was given some janitorial work to do with other teams of inmates. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer was working bathroom cleanup detail when he was paired with two highly dangerous gentlemen, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. 20 minutes after they started, a prison guard came by to check up on them and found Dahmer lying face down in a pool of blood with his head bashed in. Upon arriving at the hospital, Dahmer was pronounced dead at 9:11 a.m. They compared his injuries to those of a car accident. Scarver claimed, "God told me to do it." At any rate, he received another life sentence for his actions. Dahmer was cremated, and because his parents were divorced, each received half of his remains after a court battle over the ashes. A few years after Dahmer went to prison, the apartment complex where all this brutality took place was demolished. Hopefully some of the memories that went with it were demolished as well. But it is one thing for certain that the victims' families never really got closure. Although Dahmer had probably received his just desserts in prison, it still doesn't tell us why he did what he did. If you like the program, hit the bell, hit the subscribe button, and hit the like button so you'll be notified of any future episodes on this channel. I wanted to let you know the reason why there has been few and far between episodes is, well, number one, on September 19th at about 5:30 a.m., I had a heart attack and I had to be brought to the hospital. I'm okay now. They put a stent in and hopefully everything's fine. I'm on medications and been watching what I eat and everything. But that's why it slowed down. But there'll probably be some episodes coming up in December, maybe one or two in December. And I'd like you to stay tuned to the channel. We just, we're up to 7,190 something subscribers. Hopefully we'll get to 10,000 before June of next year, hopefully. Keep on watching, and until next time.